Gamers, today we're gonna be talking about your favorite Jeanne d'Arc, the OP Civ, as we know it in them gold leagues. I did play a day of JD, but I felt like I don't need too many games because I have played JD in the tournament, probably my second most played Civ out of the new Civs. So I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on, how to play JD, which builds are viable, different heroes, different abilities, and all that. So I'm here to give you my opinion on what should be buffed, what should be nerfed in general, the plan for this Civ for the future, kind of how I think it's going to be played. I'll start with the main difference between French and Jeanne d'Arc is Jeanne d'Arc needs a lot less food compared to French. French's eco is higher because they produce villagers faster, so they will have a lot more villagers. If they're both land civs, Jeanne d'Arc has a higher chance to be played on maps where there's not a lot of food, whereas French actually needs a lot of food to sustain themselves because you produce villagers faster and you also go for Knight Archer, so you need a lot of food to sustain. So if you're playing on like Hidden Valley, even though in theory it's a good Knight Civ because it's such a long map and you can harass and all that, it's actually not good for French at all because the amount of food on that map is not very high, whereas JD is played because you don't need a lot of food because of the Consecrate ability, so she's played there. You can also play Jeanne d'Arc on Prairie, whereas French, yeah, you can play it, but it is not as good. And the reason obviously you don't need as much food is because your TC produces at a normal time, and also Consecrate reduces the food cost of whatever building you consecrate, right? With that being said, I think Jeanne d'Arc can also be played on like hybrid maps because you can level up your hero while you're building up your water eco. So even if the opponent is like rushing you with Spearman in Dark Age, there are ways where you can level up a hero somewhat quickly and go like Archer or Man at Arm and try to defend with the hero, which is pretty cool. Now, regarding Jeanne d'Arc's strengths and weaknesses, I would say clearly, the most obvious one, let's get it out of the way. Jeanne d'Arc's strongest is if you're in Feudal Age and you have level 3 on your melee version of the hero, right? Then you can just kind of cleave everything and kill everything down and just get a lot of XP and kind of scale from that and, just go on and to win the game. The weakest point of Jeanne d'Arc is when you don't get level 3 in Age 2 and the game progresses to Age 3, but you're still level 2 hero, because that means you are behind on XP. She doesn't really have a specific age where she's just like bad, because just like French, Jeanne d'Arc is pretty decent in Imperial because of the Arbalest from Red Palace. It makes it very hard to raid Jeanne d'Arc in the late game. She can spawn free units. She has the ability on level 4 to give attack speed to all her units. The crossbows obviously are really good. You can go Knights, you can go Horsemen, and you can kind of play the War of Nutrition where you can consecrate infinite amount of buildings. So it doesn't matter how many resources are on the map. It doesn't matter how many production buildings you have. You can consecrate as many as possible, as many as you can fit, which includes siege workshops, and you can also get an upgrade in blacksmith that further reduces cost of gold and wood as well, so your siege can be cheaper. So that's pretty nice. So I don't think she has like necessarily a weak age. It's more like what level she is depending on what age you're in. Other than that, I wouldn't say that she has like a glaring age where she's just too weak compared to the other civs. I would say, just like French, her transitioning to farms is a bit rough. There's no real bonuses for economy. You do use less food, so technically you could put more workers on wood to get the farm transition, but that was the only kind of rough spot of the Civ. Now, let's talk about the good and the bad. I think that right now, there's been so much talk that I don't want to go through it like all over again about the hero and about OP and yada yada. I personally think that Civ is not OP at all. It's probably in line with like 6, 7, 8 other Civs in terms of like how good it is. I would probably put it like currently in A tier. because there's only one true S tier Civ, which you're gonna have to watch in the a different video. I think it's a pretty good Civ, but there are some downsides to it. And the downside and the biggest weakness is, while the hero, if it levels up and if you're killing a lot of shit and you're, you know, doing well, it's amazing. But the problem with that kind of power is that there's too much power in the hero. So if the hero is not doing well, if the hero dies, you are in a lot of trouble. So for example, whenever Consecrate is going, you know, getting fuller and fuller on the bar, if the hero dies, the Consecrate resets from the start. So not only you lose the hero, not only you have to, you know, pay for the hero to come back, but you also use the economic advantage that you have, which is consecrating your buildings for them to cost cheaper. So the thing that is strongest about Jeanne d'Arc is also the weakest thing. So losing or keeping the hero alive, that's all this Civ is about. Doesn't matter, you know, you can have 2 TCs and all that, but the hero is the main point. The main character, literally. You know, if you're playing JD, your goal is to keep the hero alive, kill stuff, level it up. If you're playing against JD, your goal is to not fight or snipe her so she doesn't get XP. And depending how that interaction goes, the success of how well you do with her will go up or down, right? And then there's some civs that are very good at sniping Jeanne d'Arc or avoiding to fight her, and there are some civs that are kind of stuck fighting her and then have bad trades. But I'll talk about the matchups a bit later. So regarding the hero itself, I personally think that I made recently videos how to counter Jeanne d'Arc with, I think, like 11 or 12 different civs. Gave examples, showed games, and I'm also going to do it for the other civs as well. And I think the more people learn how to play against Jeanne d'Arc, her win rate will drop, especially in lower leagues. I don't think the hero necessarily needs nerfs. I suggested this before already, but I think adding something like more levels to her would be pretty good, because the difference from level 2 to level 3 is quite massive in terms of power. And especially if it hits in feudal, it's just a big boost all of a sudden. So maybe if they added 1-2 more levels where she scales a bit slower would be good. Other than that, I don't think the Civ is overpowered. I don't think the Civ is going to see any bans in tournaments even. You know, maybe here and there, but as long as there's hybrid maps, as long as some of the other civs exist, I don't think people are going to focus on this civ specifically. I do think that the melee version of Jeanne d'Arc is a lot better compared to the range version. I don't think it's always better. There are some civs that I would suggest you to try out Jeanne d'Arc as ranged, and those civs are against Rus, for example, against French, against Jeanne d'Arc in a mirror, against OOTD, and against HRE. And the reason why Archer might be better in those situations is because the cleave damage against Knight civs is not as good, because you won't take, you know, a big part of percentage of their health. Like if you're fighting against Mass Spearmen like Jushi's Legacy, you don't want to go Archer because you want to go for the melee hero so that you can cleave, you know, Zuginu or Spearman or whatever else. But if you're playing against French, for example, or Rus, they're usually going to open Knights, and if they have 3 Knights and you have 3 Knights in the hero, using that Q is not going to do too much. So there's some potential there where you take the Archer and then you can snipe the Knights, you can snipe the Spearmen if they go for that. You can also harass the gold, like if there's a civ that's trying to rush castle like HRE. Instead of using the melee hero and just not being able to approach the tower, you can always find an angle with the Archer Jeanne where you hit the worker twice, and then I think it's twice, and then you do the Q ability and you actually kill the worker. So you can do stuff like that. And then later on, if HRE, let's say, goes Knights and your hero is level 3, then your hero will have an arrow that does 100 damage, or you can snipe prelates, you can run around snipe workers, which is something that I feel like is underestimated a little bit. So level 3 Jeanne d'Arc as an Archer one-shots a worker because it deals 100 damage. So what you can do is just run around with the hero. If you have 4 cooldowns, you can just go pop 4 workers and just run back home. Other than that, I think that in general, like I said, the melee version is better. So maybe some kind of buff to the range version would be good while nerfing the melee one slightly. I think maybe nerfing, like, I don't know, 10% damage, 15% damage on the melee ability cleave would be good, and maybe buffing the range version somehow. There's so many ways you can buffer range version that, you know, like one of the things you could do is just reduce the cooldown of the Q ability, because it is single target. So you're not like cleaving 5 targets or 10 targets. You're just doing damage to one at a time. So I think her range version can probably use a buff because the melee one is probably too dominant. And then the melee one can get slight nerf because of the Q ability being too strong. There's also a discussion whether, you know, her level 3 and level 4 taking 50 and 66% reduced range damage is okay. I personally think it's probably too much, because it feels like archers or crossbows are just not really doing a lot of damage. And it kind of feels like she's just running in and killing stuff, and the only thing that can kill her is like spearmen, effectively. But if that were to get nerfed, then the Civ would probably need buff somewhere else. And I hope that, let's say they go from 50% reduced damage at level 3 to like 25 or 30%, and it goes up to 50% at level 4. I would be completely okay with that if they buff the Civ not in the hero. So not just buff the hero again somewhere else, but buff, I don't know, like buff the TCs, give a unique upgrade to one of their units, you know, something, give a buff somewhere else, so that the Civ is still important to use the hero. It still relies on the hero quite a lot, but it's not the end of the world if your hero like dies. It's not just insta loss, and you don't rely on the hero to win the game or lose the game. So that's kind of what I think about that. Other than that, I think that she's kind of more often played these days as like the infantry Civ of the French variant. People do open knights and stuff, but eventually you kind of transition into spearman, man-at-arm, crossbow, because with the consecration ability, your spearmen are basically like costing nothing, and you can just mass so many units even off of 1 TC. Now, regarding the strategies, I have tried 2 TC. The 1 TC is just a no-brainer. It works, so there's no reason not to do it. I have tried 2 TC, just going 2 TC and then producing villagers and then just massing units and going for it. And I feel like 2 TC is not bad at all. You can still be very aggressive after 2 TC, and it kind of reminds me of the old French where, you build 2 TC and then you just start producing units and you force your opponent to fight you. Now, I haven't really noticed like a specific time where I would go 1 TC versus 2 TC. I think both are just viable. I'm not going to say they're like exactly equally good, but I do think it's pretty good. If you notice that your opponent has like forward food, no matter what Civ they play, if you go 2 TC and then force the fights and they cannot get to the forward food because you're putting pressure, then they're probably going to lose the game. And I actually had a game where I played against Jushi's Legacy and his food was kind of a little bit far out. So what I did is I went 2 TC, he went 2 TC, and I just put a lot of pressure. He was not able to get to the food, and then I managed to win the game. So you can play it like that, because if your opponent is 2 TC and you're 1, they don't really have to make any big moves. They can even start farm transition super early. But if you're 2 TC and they're 2 TC, then the longer the feudal battle goes, it's gonna go into your advantage, because you get consecration, so you reduce the cost of villagers and knights and archers, and you will also level your hero. So if you find yourself in a 2 TC versus 2 TC situation, the opponent should probably try to age up as fast as possible and not fight while you want to fight. I've also tried, to be fair, I only tried this once. I tried Jeanne d'Arc with the cock, aka Chamber of Commerce. I don't know what else you were thinking about. And I think it has some potential. Like, I think cock is kind of like a meme landmark, but it's funny how it works, and I think it might become the meta in the future, or depending on the map, like if the map is good for it. And the reason is next. So when French goes for the cock build, French has to defend, and it's like you're kind of steering, you're gonna die, yada yada, and then you gotta build walls, and then you gotta build that. But French doesn't necessarily want to fight if they're going for the trade build, right? They just want to trade. But this is the interesting part. If you play Jeanne d'Arc and you go for the cock build, the opponent attacking you actually works out in your favor, right? Because you're putting them in a very weird situation where they will either fight your trade or they will let you boom with trade, which obviously is very strong. But if they do fight you, your hero will be leveling, right? So I feel like the opponent, in theory, right? I'm not saying this is like the way to go. I'm just saying I can see this becoming a thing in the future. In theory, there's no good option really as the opponent, because you either let the trade go, which is going to cost you, or you fight Jeanne d'Arc, and if the opponent is good and you know, manages to not lose the hero and they're pushing you back, then you're leveling their hero. And then once it hits level 3, then you're screwed. Who knows? Maybe it becomes the meta. Maybe JD is going to be the trade French in the future. Now, regarding the matchups, like I said, I have the videos on how to counter Jeanne d'Arc, so if you're struggling against her, definitely check those out. But in general, the best way to play against her is to either rush castle, go to TC and try to avoid fighting her, or if you do fight her, make sure to sniper. So the best civs, I would say, against Jeanne d'Arc are probably going to be Ayubid. I actually think that HRE is pretty good against Jeanne d'Arc. I think OTD is really good against Jeanne d'Arc because they can rush castle and have very strong units. I think English is pretty good against Jeanne d'Arc. Malian early on can be good, but if the hero over levels, Malian will have a very hard time killing it. And then I would probably say one of the biggest counters to Jeanne d'Arc are probably Ottoman and Rus. Rus because they kill all the animals, so the amount of XP on the map is vastly reduced. And then Ottoman because of Janissaries. Janissaries just absolutely destroy Jeanne d'Arc, so Ottoman's probably one of the best civs against her. Now, the civs that Jeanne d'Arc is good against are the civs that are dependent or want to fight in Feudal Age. Or, even if they don't want to fight, they actually don't have any units that directly counter. So, for example, English can play 2 TC against Jeanne d'Arc because you can just sit back and longbows can kill Jeanne d'Arc. But if you're playing a civ like Abbasid, Abbasid doesn't really have knights, it doesn't really have longbows, it doesn't have javelin throwers, it doesn't have any units to 2-shotter or 3-shot or whatever. So civs like Abbasid, civs like you know, probably French, Delhi, maybe Mongol, civs that do want to fight in feudal are gonna struggle against her because you're gonna be giving her XP. Whether you're winning or losing the battles, you will level her, and eventually the battle, you know, it's gonna scale the other way. And I would say that Delhi is probably one of the most unfortunate civs for Delhi, that is, to run into, which is JD, because Delhi is all about sacred sites and map control. And if you're playing against JD, then yeah, she's gonna be like, yeah, I'll make units too, and then you fight and then you level her up. So yeah. Other than that, I think in the future for this civ, I think is probably going to be a civ that can play multiple different ways like it can now. I think 1 TC is more than fine. I think 2 TC is more than fine. But I also do see, like I mentioned earlier, that the cock build on Jeanne d'Arc might be a thing, depending, you know, if you have a good trade post. So that's it. Overall, I think the civ is in a fight state. Maybe the melee Jeanne d'Arc is overtuned a little bit. Maybe the range one is undertuned. And I personally dislike that so much power is placed into the hero. So if we could take that power and maybe, you know, spread it across the whole civ instead of just a hero, I think that would be a good move forward, because it wouldn't be just about, can I level the hero or am I gonna die trying kind of thing. So that's kind of my take on it. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will also be doing 1 day of Jushi's Legacy into giving my opinion about Jushi's Legacy, and then I might be doing this for the old civs as well. Anyway, if you're watching on YouTube, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Check me out on Twitch. I'm probably live right now doing the cock build. If you're watching on Twitch, let's keep going.